The perpetual occupation of Afghanistan has become so normalized, it mostly serves as background noise to Americans. It's even jokingly referred to as the forever war, accepted as just a constant reality. A soldier dies now and again, a couple dozen civilians get killed in another bombing. It's never enough to stir the population to pressure Washington to stop it. The endless war drags on. Since 2001, almost 1 million U.S. troops have been deployed to Afghanistan, many repeatedly. Of those, 2,300 have died. And the new revelation that nearly 4,000 U.S. mercenaries have also died fighting in Afghanistan, almost double the number of U.S. troops, shows the American occupation is even bigger than we've been led to believe. From Bush to Obama to Trump, every president promised to end the war. But always, their plans to bring the troops home first required sending more troops.
People often ask me, how long will this last? This particular battlefront will last as long as it takes to bring al-Qaeda to justice. It may happen tomorrow. It may happen a month from now. It may take a year or two, but we will prevail.
Al-Qaeda is on the path to defeat, and by 2014, the war in Afghanistan will be over.
And as Commander-in-Chief, I have determined that it is in our vital national interest to send an additional 30,000 U.S. troops to Afghanistan. Others will ask, why don't we leave immediately? That answer is also clear. We must give Afghanistan the opportunity to stabilize.
The consequences of a rapid exit are both predictable and unacceptable. We will not talk about numbers of troops or our plans for further military activities. Conditions on the ground, not arbitrary timetables, will guide our strategy from now on.
And there's a reason, despite an unresolvable military quagmire, that the empire won't let go of Afghanistan. First, you have to look at the world in the same way the capitalist class looks at the world, as a chessboard. Every country another piece on an imperial puzzle they long to complete.
Maybe you can be one of us, the few, the proud, the Marines.
Afghanistan, just as a landmass, sits at the doorstep of the main rising competitors to American hegemony: China, India, and Russia. It also borders oil-rich nations the U.S. wants to dominate: Iran, and a litany of former Soviet republics. This central positioning has long made Afghanistan the dream site of oil pipelines planned by U.S. corporations. But those untapped profits pale in comparison to Afghanistan's real hidden treasure. In 2010, an internal Pentagon memo identified $1 trillion in mineral wealth beneath Afghan soil. The Pentagon said Afghanistan could become the Saudi Arabia of lithium, a mineral used in every smartphone and laptop. Lithium is only one of many resources to be pillaged. As the report explained, huge veins of iron, copper, cobalt, gold, and critical industrial metals are so big and include so many minerals that are essential to modern industry that Afghanistan could eventually be transformed into one of the most important mining centers in the world.
The resources have never been fully exploited because of decades of armed conflict. In a visit to Washington last month, Afghan President Hamid Karzai said the value could be up to $3 trillion.
It's very heartening that Afghanistan has a very bright future if the Afghan mineral reserves are properly extracted.
Keeping U.S. forces in Afghanistan simply to secure rights to strip the ground is more than enough reason for the empire. Coincidentally, since the U.S. invasion, Afghanistan has become the largest opium producer in the world. At the same time, the United States has the world's biggest appetite for opium, which Big Pharma is currently forced to pay a pretty premium to purchase from India and Turkey. If only there was a country the U.S. could exploit as a neo-colony for the same product. Not to mention, the CIA has a long history of using illicit drug money to fund its black ops. While there are so many different sources of potential profit to be made with a total victory, for now, it's the military-industrial complex that is reaping the greatest rewards. A significant slice of the unknown trillions the U.S. has spent in Afghanistan has gone straight to corporate defense contractors. Every bomb dropped or bullet fired, every aircraft or mercenary deployed, is another $1 million payment to the defense industry. Good thing they're also determining the policy. The top 3 war profiteers are Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Boeing. Just a coincidence, then, that Trump appointed Lockheed Martin's senior executive John Rood as Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, and Raytheon's senior executive Mark Esper as Secretary of Defense, who replaced Boeing's senior executive Patrick Shanahan. Do we need any more proof that war is a racket? When you take a closer look at the Afghanistan war, it's glaringly apparent that all of these lives are being sacrificed for the continued financial gain of multi-billion-dollar firms. It's a reality so scandalous, so transparently criminal, that it should be all the political ammo that's needed to force the war to end. The problem with this war is there's virtually no pressure for any politician or military official to take responsibility or be held accountable. Anyone in power can just wait to pass the problem on to the next executor. And for this war to end, we have to look at where it really started.
I looked up in a manual the burning temperature of jet fuel and found that under the conditions that existed at the World Trade Center on 9/11, that jet fuel had to have been burning at about 750 degrees Fahrenheit. I also noticed that the official explanation of what happened there was that the heat from the fire supposedly softened the steel and thereby brought the buildings down. If you have a flame at 750 degrees, you can hold that flame under a steel beam forever, and you'll never reach a high enough temperature to bend steel, let alone melt it. So immediately I knew at that point that the official explanation was dead wrong.
Every war fought starts with a false flag operation.
You can't, in all seriousness, sit there and try and make out anybody.
Okay, let me ask you this, Piers. Wait a minute. Let me ask you something. How much studying have you actually done of 9/11 other than what the government's told you and what mainstream media has told you? I've been studying it 4 years.
I was editor of a national newspaper.
I've talked to people. Wait a minute.
In-depth every day for 5-6 months.
Really?
So I know a lot about it.
Well,
and one thing I do know is,
let me ask you this then.
You cannot say that any member of the Bush administration knew it was going to happen or wanted it to happen. It's a ridiculous thing to say.
Ridiculous. Okay, let's talk about your BBC. I have a tape of a BBC reporter broadcasting directly back to England talking about a third building has collapsed. World Trade Center Building 7 talks for 7 minutes. All the while she's talking, World Trade Center Building 7 is still standing right behind her. It didn't fall for another half hour. Yet they were doing a pre-broadcast back to England that, yes, it's true,
you need to
that
take
this
a break
building
here.
fell and it hadn't fallen yet.
If you're trying to make out the British Broadcasting Company, one of the most respected news organisations in the world, was inventing huge buildings falling over, you need to have a break, Jesse. We'll come back after the break and we'll talk about Israel and Iran.
Are you kidding me? This is a fact, my friend.
That was Jesse Ventura live along with our studio audience. We left a fairly heated debate about various theories that you have about 9/11 and so on. Let's move on to...
and the government only has a theory.
Right, well, the government has...
No, this is a theory. Their theory is 19 Islamic radicals armed with box cutters defeated our multi-billion-dollar air defense system, all while conspiring with a bearded guy in a cave in Afghanistan.
That is exactly what happened.
That's their theory.
No, that's not a theory. It's a fact.
That's their theory.
No, Jesse,
that's a fact.
That's what happened.
Really?
Yes, I'm sorry to kill your conspiracy theories, but that is what happened.
Then why haven't anyone been brought up for trial?
Because they
haven't given one shred of evidence in a trial.
In case you missed the story.
Well, then what do we got all these guys in Gitmo for? And we got the supposed confessor to it, who they waterboarded 180 times to get the confession. Got news for you, Piers. If they waterboarded you 180 times, you'd confess to it.
See, now...
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th. Malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves, away from the guilty.
We got there, we got our orders from the command post to team up with Engine 5 and start our way up, right? So we're standing there in the lobby, we're getting all together. All of a sudden, we hear... I look down to my right, and the elevators exploded, something out of like a Bruce Willis Die Hard movie. People just come running out of the elevators, on fire, fireballed. I mean, it was like, what is going on here? There's something's up here. I mean, the plane's up there, now there's fire down here. People run around all on fire. This is crazy. We got down to the lobby, and everything was blown out, exploded. Everything was... We were the only ones in the lobby now. We're going, wait a second here. Where is everybody? Because the building was coming down the outside. They moved the command post to World Trade Center too. So now we're like, we didn't get no. Where is everybody? We were in the lobby. It looks like everything was exploded. Everything was gone. We're like, what is going on here? We didn't know. We were like, this is crazy. For every window in the lobby to be exploded. I mean, them windows were like as thick as forget it. They were 2-3 inch glasses. You know, come on. They exploded out of the lobby. You know, something. It wasn't from the jet fuel. No way. The elevators exploded. They were down from the lobby. The lobby was over here. That should never have happened. Something would happen there, and that wasn't. We came down. It looked like a bomb went off in the lobby. There was no fire. It just looked like a bomb went off.
Yeah, here's one of the guys who can tell you I'm okay. All right. Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
Be right now. You gotta get back from here.
Mom, you know that. You gotta get back. All right. Don't worry about me. You need to make calls right now. All right.
My son Bobby was killed in the World Trade Center by an explosion that went off before the towers fell. Bobby was entering the lobby on his way to a meeting. The explosion that killed him may have happened right when the first plane hit. But according to some eyewitnesses, it occurred even before that.
I think a bomb went off in the lobby first, then a plane hit the building.
The bomb hit the lobby first, and a couple of seconds in the first plane hit.
We were to the field. I had a full body, and we took him home and buried him. Bobby's whole face was obliterated and then had lacerations through his chest. It just seemed like he was hit. The only way I can say is it looked like he was hit by a shotgun. With his injuries, there was no doubt in my mind that he was hit with some sort of explosion. I talked to, I don't know how many firemen, how many EMT workers. I talked to people in the basement, and everyone's talking about these explosions going off.
We was in the explosion. We was in the lobby, and then the third explosion, the whole lobby collapsed on us.
I spoke to the chief of safety for the New York City Fire Department. He thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building.
It was a secondary explosion, probably a device either planted before or on the aircraft.
What you told me is that there was the plane or whatever hit the building, then the secondary explosion.
It was like 3 explosions after that. We came in after the fire. We came when the fire was going on already.
I was down in the basement, came down, all of a sudden the elevator blew up, smoke. I dragged the guy out, his skin was hanging off.
I know of people that got killed in the basement. I know of people that got broken legs in the basement. People that got reconstructive surgery because the walls hit them in the face.
We finally got down to the lobby. Then we get to the lobby. This is the biggest.
When we came out on the lobby, there were still people on the floor, dead on the floor. There was a person encrusted on the floor.
Well, I have here the 9/11 Commission report, and this is their explanation. A jet fuel fireball erupted upon impact and shot down at least one bank of elevators. The fireball exploded onto numerous lower floors, including the 77th and 22nd floor, the West Street lobby level, and the B4 level, 4 stories below ground. And this really struck me. They say the fireball came down the one elevator shaft, exploding on 72nd floor, exploding on the 22nd floor, exploding in the lobby. It's 208 feet by 208 feet. That's a big place. All the windows were blown out.
something had happened right there in the lobby.
You just saw that all the windows were blown out.
The lobby looked like the plane hit the lobby.
The pass station, there's a lot of damage to the pass station.
Well, I was in the pass train, and there was a huge explosion sound.
Again, let's get back to that asinine fireball.
Later, they figure out that flaming jet fuel had shot straight down the elevator shaft.
Coming down 93 floors, stopping at all those places, come out, supposedly at the lobby, and blowing all the windows out. That is impossible.
This report represents the unanimous conclusion of the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks upon the United States.
Even 9/11 commissioners said it was a sham. They were there to support the official story of 9/11, which was the towers came down by fire.
This is as close as we can get to the base of the World Trade Center. You can see the firemen assembled here, the police officers, FBI agents, and you can see the two towers. A huge explosion now raining debris on all of us.
Of course, the towers being as tall as they are, how do you think they would come down in free fall speed or practically free fall speed? You have to have demolition set up in there. These buildings were brought down by demolition.
The second building that was hit by the plane has just completely collapsed. The entire building has just collapsed as if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it folded down on itself and it is not there anymore.
About 75 flights up, below the fire, I saw from the corner, boom, 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 boom.
This was clearly, the way the structure is collapsing, this was the result of something that was planned. It's not accidental that the first tower just happened to collapse and then the second tower just happened to collapse in exactly the same way. How they accomplished this, we don't know.
So 2 planes and explosives that were in the building, is that correct?
That is the working theory at this point. That is still unconfirmed. That is what the FBI is going on at this point.
I was on a Gerardo show in 2010, and Gerardo, he looked at the films of Building 7 come down. He said to me, he said, God, Bob, you're absolutely right. This looks like a demolition to me.
We've all seen old, obsolete buildings being demolished by the professionals who can actually collapse a building right in its own footprint. That's what it looks like happened to Building 7.
We heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. It looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out. About a second later, the bottom floor caves out. The building followed after that.
Then I walked out to the lobby, and Huckabee's there. And he said, this is unbelievable. I can't believe this. He says, this is a demolition. He told me it was a demolition. And I said, of course it was. But then you see what happens. You know, everybody shut up.
So what do you want? Let's get to the bottom line before we're out of time.
I want truth. I've been lied to. I'm a parent who has an obligation to find out why my son was murdered.
They did on that site is to provide references, and I like that because then I can check, you know. Now I check for myself, so I go to this reference. It talks about sulfidation of steel. Gosh, that's curious. How did this sulfur get in this steel? You know, it's high temperature corrosion of the steel with sulfur. Man, that's really strange. I went to the source, I read it, and pretty quick I'm learning about molten metal pools under both towers after they collapsed, and Building 7. Now, Building 7 wasn't even hit by a jet, you know, and yet it comes down, and then it's got this molten metal underneath. And where'd that come from? I mean, you know, I hear people say, well, that would be from the metal of the planes. Well, that might work for the towers, possibly, but it sure doesn't work for Building 7. You know, it was 300 plus feet away from the North Tower, and no plane hit it. So where does this molten metal come from? So pretty quick then, as I studied this, I wrote up a paper, which many of you have seen. If you haven't, I hope you would. Just Google on Steve Jones, World Trade Center. It'll pull it right up. And I studied various aspects. And the molten metal is my first topic. It's the one that really caught my interest, and the data is just coming together. Now, I have a sample of this molten metal. previously molten metal here. Just a tiny sample. This is really all we need. I brought along with me at the last minute. I thought, well, I'll throw that in. And by analyzing this, we determined it is not molten aluminum from the plane. Okay. Indeed, it contains a great deal of iron, which is the product of the thermite reaction.
Let's listen to John Gross, lead engineer of NIST, tell us about the molten metal from his perspective.
First of all, let's go back to your basic premise that there was a pool of molten steel. I know of absolutely nobody, no eyewitness who said so, nobody who's produced it.
You'd get down below and you'd see molten steel running down the channel rails. Like you're in a foundry. Like lava.
From a volcano. No eyewitness who said so.
There actually melted beams where it was molten steel that was being dug out.
No eyewitness who said so.
Underground, it was still so hot that molten metal dripped down the sides of a wall.
No eyewitness who said so.
And the cleanup was very difficult. The steel was coming out red in certain areas from the first couple of weeks at least.
No eyewitness who said so.
As of 21 days after the attack, the fires were still burning and molten steel was still running, says World Trade Center structural engineer Leslie Robertson.
No eyewitness who said so.
Saw pools of literally molten steel.
No eyewitness who said so.
And this structural engineer, Abu Hazanastani from Berkeley, cites and documents, I saw melting of girders in the World Trade Center.
Nobody who's produced it.
This fused element of steel, molten steel.
Nobody who's produced it. Nobody who's produced it. Nobody who's produced it. Nobody who's produced it. Nobody who's produced it.
NASA pictures, thermal images showed those sorts of temperatures in the basement.
What is the problem here? Somebody's lying. I'm going to leave it up to you to make your own conclusions.
What's this other jet doing? What's this other jet doing? Holy fuck!
Oh my God! Oh my God! Jesus fucking Christ!
Don't touch it.
Oh my God!
I mean, when you look at it, the building has collapsed. That tower just came down.
This is clearly, the way the structure is collapsing, this was the result of something that was planned. This is not, it's not accidental that the first tower just happened to collapse and then the second tower just happened to collapse in exactly the same way. How they accomplished this, we don't know.
We made it outside, we made it about a block.
We made it at least 2 blocks, and we started running. Floor by floor, instead of popping out.
It was if they had detonated.
Detonated.
They were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down. I was watching it and running. Just ran up West. And then you just sort of, this cloud of shit chasing you down.
Just ran up West Street.
I could not run it. I jumped behind a battalion car, I took the car, it was swinging down.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Now, something new as we look at these tiny spheres. This is sphere Y. Does it look like thermate? Does it have the basic signature? The answer is yes. Look at the aluminum peak there, and iron, and sulfur. Iron, about 50%, aluminum, about 20%. Very typical for thermites also. Now we have a lot of manganese and potassium. Look at that showing up. When I saw this, I just about jumped up and down. What does potassium and manganese, anybody know what would you use as an oxidizer? Okay, right, potassium permanganate. It's a great oxidizer. I had put potassium permanganate in one of our thermite reactions last September, after I was put on leave, incidentally. But it was after I was put on leave. I still kept going. I want to know. I don't care. I want to know what's going on here. And thank you. I mean, I'm just like you. I want to know. You know, we want to know, and we want some answers. So in these, they're called luminothermic or thermite type reactions. Aluminum powder, and then you have an oxide or oxidizer. Iron oxide. Here, these are the typical ones. I wrote this slide some time ago. Copper oxide, potassium permanganate, barium nitrate, sulfur, of course, to make the residue, this molten stuff when you're done, to make it cut through steel quickly. You add sulfur. So here, I was just amazed. I mean, this is nothing like steel now. These little droplets, the tiny ones, 10, 50 micron drops, these little spheres now have potassium and manganese. I mean, building materials, where are you going to get that much potassium in a building material, folks? This is the smoking gun. Another one. Let's look at this dust. We all saw the enormous dust clouds generated as the World Trade Center buildings were brought down one way or the other. The dust was tested by scientists immediately to determine the degree of danger. Greg Swayze of the United States Geological Survey wrote, tests revealed the dust to be extremely alkaline, a pH of 12.1. Some of it was as caustic as liquid drain cleaner. Now, you wouldn't want to drink liquid drain cleaner, to say the least. But you can imagine this dust, as it hits the moisture in your lungs and nose, it becomes this extremely caustic fluid. It was obvious that precautions had to be taken to protect the workers and people. So, you see, this dust was deemed by scientists immediately through experiments to be extremely dangerous. It also contained asbestos and some other nasty stuff like mercury from all the fluorescent bulbs that shattered and contributed to the dust, you see. These results were sent to the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, in the United States. However, the EPA issued 5 news releases within 10 days of the attacks, 9/11, 4 more by the end of 2001. All of these reassured the public about air quality. But nevertheless, even though they were reassured, respiratory ailments began to surface in hundreds because you cannot deny the facts. This dust is extremely hazardous and it was hurting people. Now, why would the EPA issue reassurances about the dust when it was in fact extremely dangerous? You might ask yourself that question.
Afghanistan is part of what's known as the Golden Crescent, an opium and heroin producing area mostly consisting of Afghanistan and Pakistan. Afghanistan's opium trade extends at least as far back as the 1980s, when Mujahideen rebels engaged heavily in drug trafficking while fighting against the Soviet-supported government and its plan to reform Afghan society. The rebels' principal client was Gulbuddin Hetmatyar, one of the leading drug lords in the region and lead heroin refiner. The CIA supplied trucks and mules, which were used to carry arms and supplies to the Mujahideen, were also being used to transport opium to the refining facilities along the Afghan-Pakistan border. The output provided about 1/2 of all the heroin entering the United States market during that period. US officials admitted in 1990 that they had failed to take any sort of action against what they knew was a lucrative drug trade in the region, because of a desire to not offend their Afghani and Pakistani allies. In 1993, a DEA officer called Afghanistan the new Colombia of the drug world. The Central Intelligence Agency has since reiterated that at the time, the goal was to remove Soviet influence from Afghanistan, and this goal would be achieved by any means necessary. Income from the opium trade allowed the Mujahideen to finance their military campaigns against the Soviet Union. Therefore, the CIA admitted to turning a blind eye. However, an understanding of the CIA's historic role in narco-trafficking in Southeast Asia, better known as the Golden Triangle, and in South America, leave any well-informed individual with substantial questions about CIA involvement. But this we'll examine more in part 2 of this series, so please subscribe for the updates. The success of the Mujahideen, backed by drug money, eventually led to the withdrawal of Soviet forces from Afghanistan. Significantly, a year prior to the US invasion in 2001, Afghan opium production plummeted, with the Taliban outright banning the crop. The UN even went as far as to acknowledge the success of this ban in 2001, a few days after the US invasion. In the October 2001 meeting of the General Assembly, it was stated that no other UN member country was able to implement such a scheme. Turning first to drug control, I had expected to concentrate my remarks on the implications of the Taliban's ban on opium poppy cultivation in areas under their control. This year's production is around 185 tons. This is down from 3,300 tons last year, a decrease of over 94%. The invasion of Afghanistan and the toppling of the Taliban by no means stopped opium production. In fact, farmers turned once again to the infamous seed, and crops and output skyrocketed. The post-war government in Afghanistan and the post-war economy in Afghanistan are now being labeled as a narco state. A 2014 report stated that in one of the few corners of Helmand province that is peaceful and in firm government control, the green stalks, swollen bulbs of opium were growing thick and high within eyeshot of official buildings during the past poppy season, signs of a local narco state administered directly by government officials. The same report goes even further. Poppy cultivation not only is tolerated, but is a source of money that the local government depends on. In an interview with Hakim Angar, a two-time police chief of Helmand province, the lack of government and foreign initiatives to stop the growing of the crop is clear. Over the years, I have seen the central government, the local government, and the foreigners all talk very seriously about poppy. In practice, they do nothing. And behind the scenes, the government makes secret deals to enrich themselves. Ex-Afghan President Hamid Karzai and his brother are some of the wealthiest officials in the country. Karzai's brother has been directly implicated in being connected with the CIA, even running a CIA-backed paramilitary group to counter Taliban insurgency. Since the US-led invasion, the Karzai family has been central to governing the southern regions of the country. A report by the New York Times that looked extensively into corruption and drug trafficking in Afghanistan came to the conclusion that the Karzai family has benefited greatly by being useful to the CIA and to the US officials, and that the two are extensively linked. This shouldn't be surprising when considering the fact that during the invasion, the CIA supported warlords and tribes in order to help combat the Taliban. The Karzai family was pivotal to this strategy. The report continues and states that hundreds of millions of dollars in drug money are flowing through the south of the country, and nothing happens in southern Afghanistan without regional leadership knowing about it. This was the statement made by a senior American military officer who spoke on condition of anonymity due to the delicacy and sensitivity of the information. In 2016, opium production in Afghanistan rose by 43%, according to the latest Afghan surveys conducted by the United Nations. It is evident that opium is critical to Afghanistan, both now as a narco state and to its leadership. It is also evident that the CIA was involved to some degree in the narco trade in the 1980s and 1990s. During the years of US occupation, opium production did not decrease at all, and this could only have been achieved with CIA and US officials in the area turning a blind eye for one reason or another. And whistleblower reports from officials who were in Afghanistan and have since left have not been properly examined.